This lane is for first class and Global Zenith members only. Diane Hartwell didn't lower her voice when she said it. She didn't lean in or pull the woman aside with any pretense of discretion. She stepped sideways, planted herself directly in the path of the approaching passenger, and delivered the words at full gate area volume, the kind that carries past the boarding podium, past the rows of waiting seats, all the way to the adjacent lanes where other travelers stopped and looked up without quite meaning to. Priority boarding. You'll need to wait in the main seating area with your group. The woman she was speaking to didn't flinch. She didn't look down at her phone as if suddenly uncertain. She didn't step back. She stopped walking, adjusted the grip on her slim leather briefcase, and looked at Diane Hartwell with the particular stillness of a person who has seen this before and has long since decided how she handles it. Her name was Naomi Ashford, and in the next 11 minutes the gate agent standing in front of her was going to make the most expensive mistake of her 19-year career. Not because Naomi was going to cause a scene, not because she was going to demand a supervisor or raise her voice or give anyone in Terminal 4 a reason to look over. She was going to do something that Diane Hartwell, Conrad Voss, and Trevor Mills were entirely unprepared for. She was going to sit down, open her laptop, and go to work. What none of them knew was that Naomi Ashford was the founder and CEO of Ashford Logistics Group, a company whose routing software ran the cargo and passenger infrastructure of airlines across 4 continents, including this one. The reason she was on this flight at all was to fly to London and sign an $850 million contract that would rescue Zenith Airlines from financial collapse. By the time Flight 808 touched down at Heathrow, that contract would be gone. The global CEO of Zenith would be clearing out his desk. 2 airline employees would be permanently blacklisted from the industry. And the man who had been handed Naomi's first-class seat would be unemployed, stranded in London, and piecing together how to get himself home. All because Diane Hartwell looked at a black woman in a charcoal blazer and decided in 3 seconds that she didn't belong in that lane. Before we go any further, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments right now. And if this is the kind of story that makes you sit up straight, hit subscribe and give this video a like. Because what happens next from gate B22 all the way to the boardrooms of a Fortune 500 company is something you will not want to miss. Let's go back to 5:14 in the morning at JFK Terminal 4. Let's start from the very beginning. JFK International Airport at 5 in the morning has its own particular atmosphere. A restless fluorescent hum of people in transit rolling luggage across polished floors with the practiced autopilot of frequent travelers clutching oversized coffees with the grip of people who have made peace with the fact that this hour exists whether they like it or not. The lights overhead are merciless. They flatten everything, erase shadows, make everyone look a degree more exhausted than they actually are. Naomi Ashford moved through it like she owned the quiet around her. 41 years old, charcoal blazer perfectly fitted across the shoulders, deep navy blouse, slate trousers with a crease that had survived a car ride from Manhattan, low-heeled loafers that had been resoled twice because she believed in things that lasted. A single slim leather briefcase unbranded the brass locks worn to a soft shine from use. No assistant walking 3 steps behind her. No entourage. No one carrying anything on her behalf. She had flown over 300,000 miles in the last 4 years. She knew this terminal the way other people know the layout of their own homes, which escalator ran slow, which coffee kiosk opened earliest, which gate agent at B22 liked to run a tight boarding, and which one ran 5 minutes loose. She also knew exactly what her boarding pass said. Seat 1A, Flight 808 Zenith Airlines JFK to London Heathrow, confirmed 6 weeks prior. Reconfirmed the previous evening by her executive assistant Sophia, who had called the Global Zenith 5IP desk and received verbal confirmation that all documentation was current and in order. For the past 7 years, Naomi had maintained Global Zenith status, the absolute highest loyalty tier the airline offered. It was not something you applied for. It was something you crossed into after clearing an annual spend threshold that excluded nearly everyone. It came with protocol's designated lanes and a specific greeting. Welcome, Ms. Ashford, that agents were trained to deliver by name the moment her boarding pass scanned. She hadn't worn that status like a badge this morning. She never did. Ashford Logistics Group had grown from a single routing algorithm Naomi had written in a converted storage room above a dry cleaning shop in Charlotte, North Carolina, into a multi-billion-dollar infrastructure firm processing cargo and passenger logistics for 17 major carriers across 4 continents. She had built it during years when the doors in venture capital closed quietly in her face, when investors who passed on her in 1 year called back 2 years later with the practiced warmth of people pretending they had always believed. She had learned through that particular and sustained experience that for a woman like her, wealth was most powerful when it was invisible, when the room had already made its assumptions, and she had already made her calculations. This morning she was flying to London to attend a private dinner at the Savoy Hotel with Gregory Dalton, the global CEO of Zenith Airlines and members of the airline's European board. The purpose was to finalize an $850 million emergency infrastructure overhaul, a contract Zenith had spent 8 months urgently pursuing, because without it, their cargo division was hemorrhaging efficiency. Their routing systems were years behind the industry standard, and their stock was sliding in a way that was drawing quiet, predatory attention from European acquisition firms. Naomi had reviewed Zenith's internal numbers more thoroughly than their own CFO had. She knew what they needed and what they were willing to pay for it. She turned toward gate B22. The crimson carpet of the priority lane was visible from 30 feet away. So was the woman standing at the podium. Diane Hartwell had been a gate agent for Zenith Airlines for 19 years, and she wore every one of them like a credential. She was 44, sharp-featured, with platinum blonde hair pulled into a sleek French twist that managed to look effortless at 5 in the morning in a way that required considerable effort. Her uniform was standard regulation, but she wore it with the deliberate attention of someone who understood that presentation was a form of authority. Gold stud earrings, small and tasteful. A silk scarf knotted at the collar in a manner that wasn't in the employee handbook, but that no one had ever asked her to remove. Nails done in a deep burgundy precise and unchipped. She stood behind the podium with her spine straight and her chin elevated slightly. The posture of a woman who had decided long ago that she controlled the flow of people through this gate and who found quiet satisfaction in that control. She saw Naomi approaching the crimson lane from 20 feet away. She registered the blazer, the briefcase, the calm, unhurried stride that didn't accelerate toward the lane or slow with uncertainty. She completed her assessment in approximately 3 seconds. Then she stepped sideways. This lane is for first class and Global Zenith members only. Diane said, her voice carrying the smooth, absolute confidence of a person who has never once been wrong about this. Priority boarding. You'll need to wait in the main seating area with your group. Naomi stopped walking. She didn't sigh. She didn't let her expression shift by even a degree. She had heard some version of this her entire adult life, and she had learned the hard way. The expensive way. The kind of way you don't forget that the response that costs them the most is always the calmest one. She reached into the front pocket of her briefcase and retrieved her phone. The screen glowed. She extended it toward Diane. I'm aware of the lane's purpose, Naomi said, her voice level and unhurried. Seat 1. A. Naomi Ashford, Global Zenith. The digital boarding pass filled the screen, gold-rimmed the Global Zenith watermark, running diagonally across the face of the ticket in the distinctive pattern that the airline used exclusively for its highest-tier members. Diane looked at it. A flicker of something crossed her face, a brief recalibration quickly suppressed, replaced almost immediately by something harder and more practiced. She did not say, "Welcome, Ms. Ashford." She did not apologize for the assumption. She picked up the scanner with the air of a woman performing a formality she considered beneath the situation, dragged it across the barcode, and turned back to her terminal. The scanner flashed green. Diane's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Her fingers began moving across the keyboard with a speed and intention that had nothing to do with helping Naomi board her flight. "There's an anomaly with your reservation," Diane said, her eyes fixed on her screen. "A weight distribution lock on the forward cabin. I need you to step aside while I sort this out. We can't clear you for boarding at this moment." Naomi's mind processed the statement in under 2 seconds and quietly filed it under false. A Boeing 777-3 OOER was a wide-body heavy jet. It carried over 300 passengers and hundreds of thousands of pounds of cargo. It did not require weight distribution adjustments based on the presence or absence of a single passenger at the front of the aircraft. The claim was not a procedural truth. It was a stall, a technical-sounding lie dressed in the language of operational necessity. "Take your time," Naomi said. She stepped exactly 1 foot to the right and waited. She remained on the crimson carpet. She did not retreat to the general boarding area, and she did not sit down. She simply stood with the unhurried patience of a woman who had already decided how this was going to end. Diane's eyes flickered to her with barely concealed irritation. The gate agent picked up the desk phone, turned her back to Naomi, and lowered her voice into the practiced murmur of someone managing a situation they don't want overheard. Naomi caught fragments. "Need Conrad at B22. The Mills situation. I've got a passenger in 1A right now, but she's not a recognized VIP, just someone. I'm handling it, but I need override authorization." The word just landed quietly. Naomi registered it and moved on. She waited. Around her, the gate area grew louder as zone boarding filled the adjacent lanes. Diane announced baggage size restrictions twice. She checked in 4 other passengers. She processed a stroller and 2 gate-checked bags. She did not once look in Naomi's direction or offer any update. 9 minutes passed. Then came the sound of someone running. A man in his mid-30s jogged up to the priority lane, face flushed beneath a wrinkled navy suit that had clearly not been pressed since the day before. He was carrying a branded canvas tote from a firm Naomi recognized immediately. Kavanaugh and Reed, a mid-tier consultancy whose European freight operations ran in part on Ashford logistics software. He stepped directly in front of her without registering she was there. "Diane," he panted, his voice carrying the loose, confident entitlement of someone accustomed to problems resolving themselves on his behalf. "Trevor Mills. My assistant said you could work something out. I have to be on this flight. Physically can't fly in a standard seatback issues. It's documented. My supervisor knows Diane's entire bearing transformed. The stiffness dissolved. The elevated chin came down. A warm, accommodating smile appeared on her face that had been entirely absent for the past 9 minutes. "Mr. Mills, of course," she said. "We've been expecting you. We were told you might be running close. Let me get your documents sorted right now." Her fingers moved across the keyboard with an energy that was categorically different, faster, lighter, eager. The printer behind the podium hummed to life. Naomi watched. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She observed the distance between the way Diane had looked at her and the way Diane was looking at Trevor Mills, and she let that distance become a number, a fact, a piece of evidence she filed carefully away. The boarding pass printed. Naomi's eyes caught the seat number on the cardstock before Trevor's hand closed around it. 1A. "Excuse me." Naomi's voice was quiet. It was the quietest it had been since she approached the lane, which made it somehow the most arresting thing said at gate B22 all morning. "Diane." "That is my seat." Trevor Mills turned to look at her for the first time. He performed the quick, dismissive scan, the kind that takes half a second and reaches its conclusion before the eye has finished its full pass. "Look," he said with the easy, reflexive confidence of a man who had never once been told to wait for something he wanted. "I don't know what your situation is, but I have a critical client meeting in London tomorrow morning, and I physically cannot fly standard. I'm sure they'll find you something comfortable." He said it with the specific generosity of a man who considers the suggestion itself a favor. Naomi did not look at him. She kept her eyes on Diane. Diane positioned herself between them with the smooth economy of someone who had rehearsed this particular choreography. "Mr. Mills," she said, gesturing toward the jet bridge with one manicured hand. "Please proceed. We hope you enjoy your first-class experience with Zenith today." Trevor didn't need to be told twice. He adjusted the strap of his tote bag, offered Naomi a brief, easy nod that managed to contain both an apology and a dismissal in a single motion, and walked down the tunnel without looking back. Diane turned to Naomi. The accommodating smile was gone. What replaced it was something colder and more honest and, in some ways, more informative. As I was explaining before the interruption, she said, "There has been an unexpected equipment change, a significant overbooking situation in the forward cabin that required adjustment." She pushed a thin strip of paper across the counter. "You've been reassigned to seat 3-3E. You'll receive a fare difference refund within 6 to 8 weeks. "An equipment change," Naomi said. Her voice still had not changed. "On a flight where you just assigned my confirmed seat to a man who arrived 9 minutes after priority boarding began. It was a corporate operational necessity." Diane said, her chin lifting slightly. "Are you going to accept the boarding pass or forfeit the flight?" Before Naomi could respond, a man in a blue supervisor's blazer materialized at the podium. Conrad Voss, 51 years old. Silver at his temples, the kind of deliberate silver that men allow to remain because it communicates something they want communicated. An expensive watch. The measured, proprietary ease of a man who had spent 2 decades confusing mild institutional authority with genuine power. His smile was the professional kind, broad-practiced and carrying no warmth whatsoever behind it. Diane had already leaned in and spoken quietly to him. He nodded slowly, and his eyes settled on Naomi with the particular combination of condescension and boredom that powerful men deploy when they have already determined that a situation is beneath them. "Ma'am," Conrad said, clasping his hands behind his back in the posture of a man delivering a verdict. "My agent has explained the situation. We had an obligation to fulfill, and an adjustment was required. I understand this is disappointing." "I am not disappointed, Mr. Voss," Naomi said. Her voice rang clear over the ambient noise of the terminal, not raised, simply precise. "I am noting a violation of your carriage contract and a decision-making process that, based on what I have observed in the last 11 minutes, appears to have been driven by something other than weight distribution or equipment changes." Conrad sighed. It was the specific performative sigh of a man who had decided to stop pretending patience. "I'm going to be direct with you," he said. "I will not tolerate accusations at my gate. You have 2 options. You accept seat 33E and board this aircraft. Or I contact Port Authority Police, have you removed from this terminal for causing a disturbance, and place you on Zenith's internal no-fly registry. Those are your choices. Which is it?" The words sat in the gate area for a moment. Nearby, a couple had stopped their conversation. A woman in the adjacent boarding line had her phone angled in their direction. A Zenith employee on the far side of the podium was studying the floor with the fixed attention of someone who had heard something they wished they hadn't. Conrad and Diane were doing what people in their position had always done when they wanted to end a confrontation with a black woman quietly, and on their own terms. They had introduced the threat of law enforcement. It was designed to produce one of 2 outcomes: a scene that justified their narrative, or a silent retreat that left no record. Naomi looked at Conrad Voss. She looked at Diane Hartwell. She read Conrad's employee ID number from the small badge at his lapel. She noted the exact phrasing of his threat. She registered the terminal clock on the wall behind them 5:43 a.m., and she filed the timestamp with the same precision she brought to every acquisition review, every contract analysis, every piece of information she had ever used to build or dismantle something. Then she reached out and picked up the boarding pass from the counter. 33E, she said. Her voice was no longer polite. It had not become angry either. It had become something cooler and more final. The tone of a door being closed from the inside with the lock turning quietly afterward. I'll take it. She held Conrad's gaze for 3 full seconds. But I want you to understand something, Mr. Voss. The cost of this seat is going to be considerably higher than you've calculated. Conrad chuckled. It was the short, dismissive chuckle of a man who considered himself to have won. Have a good flight, ma'am, he said. Naomi turned. She picked up her briefcase. She walked toward the jet bridge. She did not look back. The jet bridge was a long gray descent industrial ceiling humming climate control, the vibration of the aircraft engines already faintly audible through the floor. Naomi's footsteps were unhurried. She passed through the forward cabin door, and a flight attendant greeted her with a professional smile that faltered almost imperceptibly when she registered the mismatch, the tailored blazer, the leather briefcase, the economy boarding pass. Naomi didn't stop to explain. She turned right and walked through first class. The lighting in the first-class cabin was deliberately warm and low, the kind engineered to make a 7-hour flight feel like something approaching civilized. Seats were wide leather pods, each with its own partition, its own small world. The air carried a faint trace of warm towels and the particular subtle vanilla of premium amenity products that cost more per unit than most passengers' meal budgets. A flight attendant was already placing small ceramic bowls of salted mixed nuts on individual consoles with the unhurried grace of someone who believed in the ceremony of it. In seat 1, a Trevor Mills had already settled in as if he had been there for hours. Jacket off, draped over the partition. Shoes removed, worn socks visible, feet extended slightly into the open space of the pod. He was scrolling something on his phone with the loose, expansive posture of a man who had decided this space was entirely his. He glanced up as Naomi passed. For a moment, just one something moved through his expression. Not guilt exactly, not remorse, but the particular discomfort of someone who has accepted a benefit they haven't fully examined. It passed quickly. He looked back at his phone. He raised his glass of sparkling water a single inch in a gesture that was neither a toast nor an acknowledgement, but something imprecise floating between the two. Naomi didn't blink. She catalogued his face, his company logo on the tote bag, the easy comfort he occupied in a space that had been hers 45 minutes ago, and she kept walking. Business class, premium economy. The cabin narrowed. The air thickened slightly. The lighting flattened. The sounds changed, a child crying somewhere in the middle rows, 2 passengers negotiating loudly over bin space. The crinkle of a snack wrapper. By the time she reached row 33, the aircraft felt like a different plane than the one she had boarded. Seat 33E sat in the center of the center section, the middle seat of the middle block, the one that receives the armrests from neither direction and the dignity from no direction at all. To her left was a man in his 60s, heavy-set, who had already claimed both rests and whose breathing had the slow, deep rhythm of someone already asleep. To her right, a teenager with earbuds loose around his neck-knees, angled outward in the unconscious, generous use of space that young people in middle seats do when they are not thinking about anyone else. Naomi looked at the seat. She thought briefly about the first time someone had told her she was in the wrong place. The particular sensation of it, not the anger which came later, but the initial moment of disorientation when the world insisted something about you that you knew to be false, and you had to hold your own knowledge steady against the pressure of the insistence. Then she sat down. She tucked her elbows in. She placed the briefcase under the seat in front of her with deliberate precision, brass locks facing up. She reached above and adjusted the reading light so it fell exactly where she needed it. She turned the air vent 2 degrees left away from her face. She did all of this with the calm, practiced economy of a woman settling in for exactly the flight she had decided to take. The teenager glanced over. She didn't acknowledge him. The older man snored, once shifted, reclaimed the armrest. Naomi closed her eyes for exactly 30 seconds. Not to rest. To run the sequence, the emails, the order, the legal instruments, the precise chain of professional and financial consequences that would begin the moment this plane crossed 10,000 feet and the Wi-Fi connected. She had not arrived at this airport unprepared. The cabin doors sealed. The plane pushed back. She opened her briefcase and took out her laptop. The aircraft taxied slowly toward the runway and in the particular suspension of a cabin preparing for takeoff. Phones going dark, tray tables, folding up the low, mechanical urgency of a machine about to commit to the sky. Naomi's mind went somewhere else entirely. Charlotte, North Carolina, 14 years ago. She had been 27 years old, and she had a business plan that had taken 3 years to build. Not a pitch deck with stock photography and aspirational projections. A fully coded, fully functional routing algorithm she had written herself in a converted storage room above a dry cleaning shop in the no-day neighborhood on a laptop that overheated if she ran it for more than 4 hours straight. She had cooled it with a bag of frozen peas from the convenience store downstairs, refreezing the bag every few hours because she wasn't going to stop working and she wasn't going to buy a new laptop until the work was finished. The algorithm solved a specific problem that logistics carriers across the country were hemorrhaging money trying to address: how to route cargo dynamically. In real time, responding to weather, holds, mechanical delays, and ground traffic congestion without requiring human intervention at every decision point. She had built a working proof of concept using publicly available data from 3 regional freight carriers. The efficiency gains were not marginal improvements. They were the kind of numbers that changed quarterly reports. She had walked into the offices of Meridian Capital on a Tuesday in October, wearing a black blazer she had bought specifically for that meeting, carrying a printed presentation binder she had assembled at a 24-hour copy center at 2 in the morning. The partner she met was named Davis. He had been in venture capital for 20 years. Behind his desk, a wall of framed term sheets. He listened for 6 minutes. Then he said, "This is impressive work for someone at your level, but infrastructure at this scale requires enterprise relationships we don't typically see from early-stage founders without existing industry ties. We'd need a proven commercial deployment before we could take this seriously." What he meant was no. What the no actually meant, what Naomi spent the next several months understanding, was that Davis had looked at her and had arrived at his conclusion before her algorithm had fully loaded on his screen. She understood this with a cold clarity when she learned through a contact at another firm 3 months later that Meridian Capital had funded a near-identical routing optimization concept developed by 2 men with no commercial deployment whatsoever on a term sheet that closed within 10 days of their first meeting. She hadn't made a scene about it. She hadn't posted about it or called anyone or spent time trying to prove what she already knew was true. She had gone back to the storage room above the dry cleaning shop, sat down in front of the overheating laptop, and rewritten the algorithm to be 30% more efficient. Then she had approached a small regional freight carrier in Charlotte, barely 50 aircraft, barely profitable, the kind of operation that didn't attract venture attention, and offered them a 6-month pilot at no cost. In exchange, she asked for data access and a letter of reference if the results justified one. The results justified considerably more than a letter. In the first quarter, the carrier's on-time departure rate improved by 22%. Their fuel routing optimization saved them $4 million before the pilot ended. The CEO, a man named Harold Osei, called her into his office on the final day of the engagement and told her that whatever she needed to make this permanent, he would make happen. She asked for a commercial contract and introductions to 2 of his peer carriers. That was where Ashford Logistics Group began. By 33, she had 14 carrier clients and a Series B funding round that the Davis from Meridian Capital had attempted to join. She declined his firm's application personally. She did it in a single-sentence email without explanation, and she felt nothing about it except a clean, specific satisfaction. By 38, her software was running cargo operations for 6 of the top 10 airlines in North America. By 41, she was on a plane to London to sign a contract worth more than Meridian Capital's entire current portfolio, and now she was in seat 33E, pressed between a sleeping stranger and a teenager who had no idea, with her elbows tucked against her own ribs in a seat she had been assigned specifically because a woman at a boarding podium had looked at her charcoal blazer and her quiet leather briefcase, and had decided in 3 seconds that she didn't belong in the lane designated for people exactly like Naomi Ashford. The same calculation, the same 3-second verdict, the same assumption dressed up in different clothes operational necessity, this time equipment change weight distribution. But underneath it, the same unchanging machinery, the reflex that looks at a black woman with resources and authority and decides without examination that those things cannot really be hers. Naomi had spent 14 years building something so undeniable that the word no had gradually stopped meaning what it once meant to her. Every door that had closed quietly in her face had eventually reopened from the other side with someone on the inside asking her, "Please to come in." She was done asking. She was also done being surprised. The plane lifted off the tarmac with a roar that pressed her back into the thin seat cushion of 33E. Below the window, the sprawl of Queens and then the dark expanse of the Atlantic opened up. The seatbelt sign chimed. The cabin settled into the steady, pressurized hum of cruising altitude. Naomi looked at the flight tracker on the small screen embedded in the seatback in front of her. Just crossing over Connecticut. 7 hours to Heathrow. She thought about the storage room above the dry cleaning shop, the bag of frozen peas, the October cold coming through the gap in the window frame, the version of herself who had sat in that room the evening after the Meridian Capital meeting, 27 years old, the no-still sitting in her chest like a weight she was learning to carry, and had decided with the particular stubbornness of a person who has no good reason to quit and no intention of doing it to keep going anyway. That woman had not known what was coming. She had simply refused to let someone else's verdict become her operating truth. Naomi navigated to the in-flight Wi-Fi portal and purchased 7 hours of premium connectivity without hesitation. The cursor blinked on the open document. She began to type. The first thing Naomi did was not send an email. She opened a secure encrypted document and began constructing a precise time-stamped record of every exchange that had occurred at Gate B22 since 5:14 a.m. She wrote in the same register she used for legal briefs and board communications. Declarative sentences, specific language, zero emotional coloring. She recorded Diane Hartwell's full name and employee ID number. Conrad Voss's name title and the verbatim text of his threat, including the specific reference to Port Authority Police and the no-fly registry. The time Trevor Mills appeared at the podium. The time his boarding pass printed. The time the scanner had flashed green on her own valid ticket. The seat number printed on Trevor's card. The timestamp on the terminal clock at the moment she was handed 33E. She saved the document to the Ashford Logistics private server. Then she opened her email. Her first message was not addressed to customer service. She did not navigate to the Zenith complaint portal. She did not call the Global Zenith member helpline. She wrote directly to Jonathan Reeves, her chief legal counsel, a man whose professional reputation in corporate litigation was, as a colleague had once described it, somewhere between surgical and merciless at his encrypted address. Jonathan. Flight 8:08, JFK to Heathrow. I am in seat 33E. My confirmed Seat 1A was reassigned at the gate to a Trevor Mills of Kavanaugh and Reed, while I was held at the podium under a fabricated weight distribution claim. Terminal manager Conrad Voss subsequently threatened me with Port Authority police and no-fly registry placement to ensure my compliance with the downgrade. I have a full-time stamped account, and am forwarding it now. Begin preparing breach of carriage contract materials. Do not file anything yet. I want to give them the opportunity to make this worse before we act. She attached the document and sent the message. Jonathan's reply came in 38 seconds. I have it. Are you all right? This is beyond egregious. Consider it ready. She typed back. I'm fine. I'm working. Do not file until I give the word. I want the full picture in place first. She opened a second window. This message she wrote more slowly, not from uncertainty, but from the discipline of choosing each word with the care it deserved. It was addressed to Gregory Dalton, Global CEO of Zenith Airlines, with copies to Marcus Webb, EVP of Operations, and the airline's Chief Legal Officer. Subject: breach of contract and immediate suspension of acquisition discussions. Gregory: I am writing to you from Seat 33E on your flight, 8:08 to London Heathrow. I hold a confirmed paid first-class reservation in Seat 1A, booked 6 weeks prior, and reconfirmed last evening through the Global Zenith VIP desk. That seat was manually reassigned to Trevor Mills of Kavanaugh and Reed by gate agent Diane Hartwell at Gate B22, Terminal 4 JFK at approximately 5:43 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. The stated justification, a weight distribution lock on the forward cabin, is operationally impossible on a Boeing 777-300ER and was fabricated to circumvent your carriage contract obligations. When I raised the violation, your terminal manager Conrad Voss threatened me with Port Authority police intervention and placement on Zenith's no-fly registry to force my compliance. I have a complete time-stamped record of this interaction. I want the following to be unambiguous. Zenith Airlines has pursued Ashford Logistics Group for 8 months for an infrastructure overhaul contract valued at $850 million. The purpose of this flight was to finalize that agreement at dinner with your European board at the Savoy Hotel this evening. That dinner will not be occurring. Effective immediately, Ashford Logistics Group is withdrawing from all acquisition discussions. Jonathan Reeves, my chief legal counsel, will deliver formal termination documentation to your office before 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I will not be attending the Savoy dinner. I will not be rescheduling it. I do not build partnerships with organizations that manufacture technical lies to remove black women from premium cabins and then threaten those women with law enforcement to guarantee their silence. Your ground staff spent 11 minutes deciding I didn't belong in that boarding lane. I have spent 14 years building something your airline desperately needs to survive. I am asking you to sit with what that comparison reveals about the culture operating inside your terminals. Regards, Naomi Ashford, founder and CEO, Ashford Logistics Group. She read it once. She removed the word desperately, not because it was inaccurate, but because the message was stronger without anything that sounded like feeling. Then she sent it. She opened a third window. This one was to Sophia. Pull everything we have on Kavanaugh and Reed. Find Trevor Mills in their executive directory. I want to know every touch point between that firm and Ashford Contracts licensing any shared infrastructure dependencies. If they are running on our software at any point in their supply chain, I want the full picture. By the time I land. Sophia's response was immediate. On it. Do you need anything else? One more thing, Naomi typed. Find me the European operations contact at Aero Global. I want an introduction arranged. Initial meeting within the week. Subject partnership discussion. She put the phone face down on the tray table, face down, so the glow of incoming notifications didn't distract her, and looked at the flight tracker. They were crossing over Nova Scotia now. 6 hours and 14 minutes to Heathrow. She reached into the briefcase and removed a thin folder, the Zenith acquisition file. She had reviewed it 7 times in the past 3 weeks. She knew its contents precisely. She opened it to the section she needed and picked up a pen. In the margin, beside the infrastructure dependency clause, she wrote 3 words. Transfer to Aero Global. She wrote it cleanly, without hesitation, the way you write something you've already decided. She put the file away. From somewhere in the forward part of the aircraft, muffled by curtain and distance, she could hear the faint clink of glassware, the sound of champagne flutes touching in first class, the soft, self-satisfied ceremony of premium service being performed for passengers who had been arranged in the order the airline expected them to occupy. She did not think about that. Not about Trevor Mills in the leather pod, not about Diane Hartwell at the podium, not about Conrad Voss and his practiced chuckle. She thought about Friday. She thought about Aero Global. She thought about what the restructured deal would look like and what it would do to Zenith's competitive positioning in the European market for the next 5 years, and she thought about those things with the focused, forward-moving precision of a person who converts obstruction into direction. She opened a new document. At the top, she typed, Aero Global Partnership Preliminary Framework. And she went to work. The 42nd floor of Zenith Airlines' Chicago headquarters had floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city grid, dark at this hour, the lake a black edge in the distance, the downtown towers lit from within like occupied buildings after an evacuation. At 6 in the morning, the executive suites were usually a particular kind of quiet. The quiet of institutional power in its resting state, undisturbed, certain of its own continuity. Gregory Dalton had come in at 5:30. He was 63 pages into the briefing documents for the Savoy dinner, a private, heavily prepared evening that he had been anticipating for the better part of a year. The seating arrangement alone had gone through 4 revisions. He had strong opinions about proximity and precedence when it came to European board members, and the finalization of an $850 million contract deserved the kind of evening that was managed rather than merely hosted. He was annotating the 3rd revision of the seating chart when his encrypted corporate phone lit up with the tone he reserved exclusively for Tier 1 emergencies. He glanced at the screen. Naomi Ashford, marked urgent. He opened the email. By the time his eyes reached the 3rd paragraph, the words breach of contract, Port Authority Police no-fly registry, and withdrawing from all acquisition discussions appearing in that order, in that clean, precise register that made every word land like a separate weight, the seating chart had slid off the edge of his desk. It hit the floor. Neither he nor anyone else would pick it up for 6 hours. He stood up. He walked to his office door. He opened it. Helen, he said. His executive assistant of 9 years looked up. She had learned to read his voice the way a physician reads a patient's face, and what she read now made her set down the correspondence she was sorting before he finished the sentence. Get Marcus Webb on a secure line. Get Patricia Sloan. Pull the live manifest for flight 808 JFK to Heathrow. Do all 3 simultaneously and get me the results in 4 minutes. Helen was already reaching for 3 different phones. Marcus Webb came on the line from his car, commuting to what he had believed 20 minutes ago would be a routine Wednesday. His voice had the careful, clipped steadiness of a man who had already read the same email and was working very hard not to convey the scope of what it meant. Gregory Marcus said, Our legal team just received a blind-copied termination notice from Jonathan Reeves at Ashford Logistics. They're citing hostile breach of carriage contract. Reeves isn't a man who drafts memos for effect. If he's filed termination documents before the plane lands, he means it. Pull up the manifest for Flight 808, Gregory said. Tell me exactly what you see in Seat 1A. Keyboard sounds over the speakerphone. A pause that lasted 4 seconds, which was 3.5 seconds longer than Marcus Webb typically paused for anything. Seat 1. A, Marcus said. Naomi Ashford, Global Zenith member. Reservation confirmed 6 weeks prior. At 5:43 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, her status was manually overridden by gate agent Diane Hartwell, downgrade code WGT-BAL-EXP. Weight and balance exception. On a 777, Gregory said. His voice had gone very quiet. On a Boeing 777-3 OOER, Marcus confirmed. They applied a weight distribution hold to displace a single passenger from the nose of a wide-body heavy jet carrying 317 people. The seat was then assigned to Trevor Mills. Senior partner Kavanaugh and Reed. Late connection from LaGuardia. Patricia Sloan Zenith's chief legal officer had joined the line 30 seconds earlier. She spoke now, and her voice was the voice of someone delivering the full severity of a diagnosis. Kavanaugh and Reed spends approximately $280,000 annually through our corporate travel accounts, she said. Ashford Logistics Group spends $11 million annually through our accounts, and that is before the infrastructure contract. The Ashford contract at $850 million represents a projected stock stabilization of 12 to 15% upon announcement. Furthermore, and this is critical, Kavanaugh and Reed's European freight operations run partially on Ashford's logistics software. They are not an independent party. They are downstream of the very company we just evicted from first class. Nobody spoke. Gregory stood at his window and looked at the city below. Dawn was beginning at the edges, that gray, hesitant light that comes before the sun commits to the day. He had run this airline for 11 years. He had navigated 3 major labor disputes, 2 significant mechanical incidents, and a global operational shutdown. He was not a man who was easily comprehended by events rather than the other way around. This was comprehending him. He understood with total clarity what had happened. A gate agent had looked at a black woman holding a confirmed first-class ticket and decided in 3 seconds that she was not the right kind of passenger for that lane. She had manufactured a technical excuse. She had involved her terminal manager. Together, they had displaced Naomi Ashford from her seat, assigned it to a white male executive arriving 9 minutes late, and then threatened Naomi with law enforcement to guarantee she accepted the downgrade without further resistance. In doing so, they had put $850 million on the table and walked away from it before sunrise. And they had done it because they looked at a black woman with a leather briefcase and decided without any further evidence required that she was nobody. "How long until the press has this?" Gregory asked. Patricia's response was immediate. If Reeves files the DOT complaint, and given the language in his termination notice, he's already preparing it, we lose control of the narrative within 48 hours, possibly less. The combination of elements here is exactly the kind of story that moves without help. A black female CEO, a fabricated weight distribution claim, a police threat, a middle seat next to the lavatories on a transatlantic flight, an $850 million contract. Every one of those details is a headline. Gregory turned from the window. "Suspend Hartwell and Voss without pay immediately," he said. "Pull their system access, revoke their credentials, lock the security footage from gate B22 before anyone touches it, and get me an ACARS to the flight deck of 808. I want captain who's on 808, James Fogarty," Marcus said. "I want Fogarty notified directly. Whatever can be done on that aircraft to demonstrate that our crew respects Miss Ashford's status, I want it done. And, Marcus," he paused, "tell me where Naomi Ashford is right now." Marcus answered quietly. "She's in seat 33E, sir. She's been there since takeoff." 40 minutes over the Atlantic, Gregory said. He said it to no one in particular. He said it like a man reading the distance between himself and something he could no longer reach. There was a silence on the call that contained within it the specific quality of people who are very good at managing things, realizing they are not going to be able to manage this one. "Get me Fogarty," Gregory said. At 35,000 feet above the North Atlantic, the cockpit of Flight 808 was the calmest place on the aircraft. Captain James Fogarty had been flying transatlantic routes for 22 years. He was 58 gray at the temples with the particular physical economy of a man who had spent decades making consequential decisions without telegraphing them. He sipped black coffee and monitored the autopilot with the practiced half-absent attention of someone whose craft has become fully internalized. The dials, the altimeter, the fuel load, all of it absorbed and processed below the level of conscious effort, leaving the surface of his attention free to notice when something was wrong. The ACARS printer began chattering. The strip came through on triple red priority, a designation Fogarty had seen perhaps 4 times in 22 years, 3 of which had involved mechanical situations, and 1 of which had involved a medical emergency with a government official. He tore the strip from the machine. He read it. He read it a second time. Then he handed it to his first officer without speaking. His first officer read it, looked up, and said, "She's been in 33E the whole flight. Get Elena up here," Fogarty said. Elena Reyes had been a flight attendant for 11 years and a chief purser for 4. She was 34 years old, with the particular gift of reading a room accurately and quickly, a skill that had served her across dozens of routes and hundreds of difficult situations. When she entered the cockpit and read the ACARS strip, the color left her face in recognizable stages. She remembered boarding. She remembered the woman. Charcoal blazer, leather briefcase, economy boarding pass that didn't match any of the rest of it. She had filed it in the category of situations that weren't her business to investigate and had moved on. She was regretting that decision with considerable specificity. She also remembered seat 1A, the shoes off before wheels up. The third pre-departure drink request. The expansive proprietary spread of a man who had decided the space was his. Captain Fogarty looked at her steadily. "Do we have anything available? Business class, premium economy, a crew rest pod?" Elena shook her head. "Holiday weekend. Complete sellout, every cabin, every seat. There is no available position on this aircraft except my jump seat, which is arguably less comfortable than 33E. Fogarty nodded. "Then go back there. Take the reserve from the forward galley, the Moet, the diplomatic reserve, and go apologize on behalf of this crew. Tell her we had no knowledge of what happened at the gate. Tell her the crew recognizes her status and that everything within our power during this flight is available to her. And when she tells me the champagne doesn't address it?" Elena asked. "You tell her she's right," Fogarty said. "And you come back and report exactly what she says to me. Word for word." Elena retrieved the bottle from the forward galley, a reserve that didn't appear on the standard service menu, kept for situations that required something beyond the standard. She poured a clean crystal flute, placed it on a silver tray alongside a warm towel and a first-class amenity kit, and began the walk from the forward galley to row 33. In terms of physical distance, it was not far. It felt considerably longer than that. When she reached row 33 and found Naomi Ashford wedged into the center seat, laptop open fingers, moving across the keyboard with focused, deliberate speed posture, somehow radiating a quality of absolute composure that made the cramped blue seat around her feel like an irrelevance, Elena felt something unexpected. Not just professionalism, something more like recognition. The specific feeling of being in the presence of a person who is entirely unshakably certain of who they are, and the particular shame of realizing how long that person has been treated otherwise on this aircraft. Ms. Ashford Elena said softly, "I'm the chief purser on this flight. On behalf of Captain Fogarty and the crew, I want you to know that what happened at that gate today was wrong, completely wrong. We are deeply sorry you are sitting here." Naomi stopped typing. She looked up. Her eyes were dark and steady and contained none of the relief or softened gratitude that Elena had somewhere below conscious thought expected to find. "How long has headquarters known?" Naomi asked. Elena blinked. The message came from executive operations." with a triple red priority flag. Naomi nodded once slowly. Then they've read my email. She looked at the silver tray with the crystal flute. She looked at it with the expression of a person looking at something that is technically generous and functionally inadequate. Elena, is there an empty seat in first class? No, ma'am. The flight is completely full. Then there's nothing to fix, Naomi said, and she said it gently, which was somehow worse than if she had said it with edge. This is not your fault, and I mean that. But a glass of reserve champagne delivered by proxy does not address what Conrad Voss said to me at 5:43 this morning. She held Elena's gaze. Tell whoever sent that ACARS that the cost of seat 33E is higher than they've calculated so far. They'll know what I mean. Elena straightened. She held the tray in both hands for a moment. Then she said, I'll relay it exactly. She walked the full length of the aircraft back to the forward galley. She set the tray down. She picked up the handset and relayed Naomi's words verbatim to the operations line. There was a silence on the other end that lasted long enough to be its own answer. Thank you, Elena Marcus Webb said finally. Please continue to monitor. Elena returned to her duties. She didn't share the details of the conversation with the other crew members. But for the remainder of the flight, the service in row 33 was different, quieter, more attentive offered before it was requested. The drink service came to that row first. The warm towels appeared without prompting. The meal choice was presented before the cart had even reached their section of the cabin. It was not enough, and everyone who was doing it knew it wasn't enough. But it was what they had, and they gave it with the specific care of people who understand the difference between a gesture and a solution, and who are making the gesture anyway, because some form of acknowledgement, however insufficient, is better than none at all. Trevor Mills had been asleep for 40 minutes when his phone began to vibrate. He surfaced the way people surface from sleep on transatlantic flights, disoriented, dry-mouthed, briefly suspended between continents and time zones, uncertain for a half-second which direction the day was moving. He reached for his phone with the automatic reflex of a man for whom the phone was the first and last object of each day. 21 missed calls, 16 text messages, 3 emails flagged high priority, all of them from the same name, Douglas Hale, CEO of Kavanaugh and Reed. A man Trevor had spoken with easily perhaps twice in 4 years, and with difficulty approximately 40 times more than that. He sat up. He opened the message thread. Mills, what happened at JFK this morning? Mills, I need you to call me now. Trevor, I just got a call from our logistics coordinator. Ashford Logistics has suspended our routing software access. We have freight containers sitting at port in Rotterdam. Our distribution grid in the Midwest is locked out. What did you do? Trevor, our entire European freight coordination is down. Ashford's general counsel has cited a hostile executive action on a Zenith flight. Are you on that flight? Trevor, are you on flight 808? Call me immediately. The blood left Trevor's face in a wave that he could physically feel. He opened the voicemails. Douglas Hale's voice in the first one was controlled. In the second one, it had crossed into the register of a man who has understood the full shape of a disaster and has stopped trying to contain his reaction to it. Trevor, I don't know what you did on that plane this morning, but I have Jonathan Reeves Ashford's legal counsel on one line and our Rotterdam coordinator telling me we have 12 containers that cannot move because our routing access has been suspended. Kavanaugh and Reed processes close to 40% of our European freight through Ashford software. If this suspension holds past 24 hours, we are looking at breach exposure with 3 of our largest clients. I need you to call me in the next 10 minutes or don't come back to the office at all. Trevor lowered the phone. He looked at the leather pod around him, the warm ambient light, the cashmere blanket that had been folded over his legs while he slept, the half-finished mimosa still sitting on his console in its crystal glass. He looked at all of it with the particular altered vision of someone whose understanding of a situation has shifted completely in 30 seconds. He thought about the gate, the woman in the charcoal blazer, the way she had said quietly without any performance of emotion, "Diane, that is my seat." He thought about what he had said in response. "I'm sure they'll find you something comfortable." How easily it had come out. How little he had examined it before it left his mouth. He pressed his call button. Elena appeared within 90 seconds. "I need to go to the economy cabin," Trevor said. "Row 33. I need to speak to the woman in 33E. It's urgent. It's a corporate matter." Elena looked at him with the expression of someone who has made a decision about where they stand and is no longer pretending otherwise. "Ms. Ashford has requested not to be disturbed," she said. "By anyone." She was specifically clear about that. "If you leave this section, I will treat it as a security concern, and we will have ground personnel waiting for you at the Heathrow gate. Please remain in your seat, Mr. Mills." Trevor stared at her. "I didn't know who she was," he said. I needed the seat. I wasn't trying to cause anything. I didn't know what they were doing to her at the gate. I just walked up, and Elena's expression did not change." "She doesn't need your explanation," Elena said quietly. "And frankly, neither do I." "Is there anything I can get you?" Trevor said nothing. Elena nodded once and walked away. He looked at the seat around him. The luxury of it, the soft leather, the low, flattering light, the quiet, attentive service that appeared before he had to ask for it. All of it had a different quality now. A sourness. The specific discomfort of occupying something that you know at some level you haven't examined until this moment was taken from someone else. Not taken by you, exactly, but taken and handed to you and accepted without a question. He had walked up to that gate, and a woman had been standing there with her boarding pass on her screen, and he had stepped directly in front of her and explained his back problems to a gate agent who had been waiting for him. He had received a boarding pass, he had walked down the jet bridge, he had settled into a seat that was not his and ordered a pre-departure drink, and put his shoes off and reclined, and he had not once turned around to look at what he'd left behind. That was not the same as doing what Diane and Conrad had done, but it was not nothing. He looked at the call button above his seat and did not press it. He put his shoes back on, both of them, slowly and carefully, the way you put things back the way they were when you understand you shouldn't have disturbed them. He folded the cashmere blanket. He placed it on the console with both hands, smoothing the edge flat. He sat upright in the seat for the remaining 4 hours of the flight and did not sleep. And somewhere over the pale gray sheet of the Irish Sea, he thought about a woman opening a laptop in a middle seat and going to work, and he thought about what kind of person does that, and he thought about what kind of person he had been at that gate, and neither answer was the one he wanted to be sitting with. 40 minutes outside London, the cloud ceiling closed in low and flat and the particular concrete gray of an English morning that has decided to make no promises. The massive Boeing 777 began its descent through it with the measured, deliberate authority of a machine that had made this particular approach hundreds of times before. In seat 33, Naomi Ashford closed her laptop. She pressed the screen gently down until the hinge engaged with a soft click. She snapped both brass locks on her briefcase shut. She stowed the bag under the seat in front of her, aligned precisely the way she always stowed it. She had sent 34 emails since takeoff. 3 of them would alter the financial and organizational landscape of 2 major corporations before the end of the business week. She had drafted the foundational framework for a partnership that would redirect one of the largest cargo infrastructure deals in the industry's current cycle. She had instructed Jonathan Reeves to have the DOT filing ready, complete, documented, airtight, and to await her word. She had done all of this from the center seat of row 33, with a sleeping man on one side and a teenager on the other, pressed into a position specifically chosen by people who had decided she was nobody. She thought about that for a moment, not with bitterness, which she had found years ago to be an inefficient use of interior space, but with the particular clear-eyed recognition of someone who understands the nature of what they have just survived and what they have done with it. The seatbelt sign illuminated. Naomi buckled her belt. She straightened her blazer. She adjusted the collar of her blouse with 2 fingers until it sat exactly as it should. 7 hours and 14 minutes in that seat, and there was not an additional crease on her that had not been there at JFK. The plane touched down with the sharp, authoritative thud of a heavy aircraft meeting a runway at controlled speed. Reverse thrust roared through the fuselage. The cabin swayed. 317 passengers exhaled collectively. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Fogarty's voice came over the PA system with the particular steadiness of a man who has made a decision and is delivering it without performance. "Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We have been assigned a priority deplaning protocol by ground control. The aisles are to remain clear until directed. We appreciate your patience." A murmur moved through the economy cabin. Hands that had been reaching toward overhead bins paused. People settled back into their seats, exchanging uncertain glances. Elena Reyes emerged from the forward galley and walked the full length of the aircraft without stopping. Past the first-class curtain, through business class, through premium economy, into the rear economy section. She stopped at row 33. "Ms. Ashford," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the still cabin, "if you would follow me, please." Naomi rose. She did not look at the man beside her who had woken and was watching with open curiosity. She did not acknowledge the teenager who had removed his earbuds for the first time in 7 hours. She lifted her briefcase from beneath the seat in front of her and stepped into the aisle. She walked forward. Through economy, through premium economy, through business class, through the first-class curtain which Elena held open. In seat 1. Trevor Mills looked up as she passed. He looked as if he had not slept in 7 hours, which he had not. His suit was creased now. His face was pale in a way that had nothing to do with the cabin air. He opened his mouth. "Ms. Ashford." His voice came out at about half the volume he intended. "Please. I didn't know what they were doing at the gate. Please." "My firm is Douglas has already." Naomi did not slow her pace. She did not turn her head. She did not offer him a syllable. To Naomi Ashford, Trevor Mills had ceased to be a problem she was solving. He had become a consequence in progress, self-executing no further action required on her part. She passed through the forward cabin door. The jet bridge air was cold and wet, the particular damp chill of a London morning pushing through the metal grating. It smelled of jet fuel and rain. Behind her, the aircraft she had just crossed the Atlantic in sat sealed and massive and still. Ahead of her, filling the width of the jet bridge with barely contained corporate alarm, stood the European senior leadership of Zenith Airlines. And beside them, the 2 members of her private security team who had met her at the gate exactly as she had instructed Sophia to arrange. She stepped forward. Patrick Whitfield had been the president of European operations for Zenith Airlines for 6 years, and in that time he had learned to prepare for nearly everything. He was 49, dark suit tie knotted with the precision of a man who understood that appearance was communication. He had 2 corporate litigators flanking him, both with leather portfolios open. He had a prepared statement, 3 concession frameworks ranked by financial exposure and talking points approved by Gregory Dalton himself 40 minutes before the plane landed. He stepped forward the moment Naomi's loafers touched the metal grating. "Ms. Ashford," he said, raising both hands in the particular gesture of a man who has been briefed to project openness. "I'm Patrick Whitfield, president of European operations. Gregory sent me directly. We have a private car waiting on the tarmac. We have a suite at the Savoy reserved for as long as you need. I want to start by saying on behalf of every person in Zenith's executive leadership that what happened to you at Gate B22 this morning was inexcusable, indefensible, and entirely contrary to. Naomi stopped walking. She looked at Patrick Whitfield. She looked at the two lawyers, noting which portfolio was opened to which section. She looked at the prepared posture of all three of them, the careful configuration of people who have been briefed on how to manage a situation rather than how to understand it. An apology delivered by a delegation, she said, her voice quiet in the cold damp of the jet bridge under the immediate pressure of financial consequences, is not an apology, Mr. Whitfield. It is a negotiating position. I don't respond to positions. I respond to facts. What are the facts you're offering me? Patrick recalibrated. He had been told she was direct. He had not fully appreciated what direct meant until this moment. The facts are these, he said. Diane Hartwell and Conrad Voss were suspended without pay within 2 hours of the incident. Their formal termination hearings are tomorrow morning. We have secured the full security footage from Gate B22 and the boarding records. We know what happened and we know it was wrong. The bad actors have been removed. Zenith is committed to making this right completely and without reservation. You fired the gate agent, Naomi said. She said it without inflection. Tell me who hired her, who reviewed Terminal 4's seating override records over the past 4 years, who looked at the pattern inside that terminal and decided it was operating within acceptable range. Patrick opened his mouth. Because Naomi continued before he could fill the space, what Diane Hartwell and Conrad Voss did this morning was not improvised. The ease of it was practiced. The speed of the lie-weight distribution lock equipment change, that's a reflex, not a decision. Reflexes are built over time in an environment that allows them to develop without correction. Suspending 2 people addresses the immediate symptom. It does not touch the deeper failure that produced them. One of the lawyers, a man named Kensington, his name visible on the portfolio tab, stepped forward with the careful precision of someone who has been authorized to offer a number. Ms. Ashford, he said, we are fully prepared to settle any civil claims privately and immediately. Whatever figure makes this right for you, we want to discuss it. You cannot afford my figure, Naomi said, and she said it without aggression, which was why it landed so heavily. She reached into the inner pocket of her blazer and removed a slim black envelope. She held it for a moment, then extended it to Kensington directly. Do not open this until I've left the terminal. Kensington took it. The weight of it in his hands was not physical. The envelope was nearly weightless, but the expression that crossed his face was the expression of a man holding something he already understands will be significant. Patrick made one more attempt because he had been sent to make one more attempt, and because Gregory Dalton had made clear that the cost of failure was not something Patrick's career could absorb. Naomi, the contract, he said. Gregory is prepared to offer full equity compensation for the incident, a comprehensive public apology, with your involvement in shaping its language, enhanced protections built into a revised agreement, and a personal commitment to the structural audit you're describing. The board has authorized everything necessary to— The contract is not available, Naomi said. She said it the way a door closes, not slammed. Simply shut with the click of a mechanism completing its function. I came to London to finalize a partnership with an organization I believed had the operational integrity to be a long-term partner. What your ground staff demonstrated at 5:43 this morning is that the culture inside Zenith's terminals contains a deep structural rot, one that has been allowed to operate quietly and without correction for long enough that its employees deploy racial bias as a standard tool of their work. Until your organization understands what built that culture and commits to dismantling it, not with press releases, but with documented, measurable structural change, I cannot attach Ashford Logistics Group to your infrastructure. She looked at Patrick Whitfield for the last time. Tell Gregory that he spent 8 months building a relationship with me in boardrooms, and 4 minutes allowing his terminal manager to threaten me with arrest at a gate. Those 2 facts cannot coexist in a partnership. He knows what the right response to that is. I trust he'll find it. She turned. Her security team fell into step beside her. The Windsor Suite concierge appeared with the black umbrella and the portfolio wallet. They moved toward the private corridor that led to the secure arrivals passage away from the terminal floor, and the press that was already beginning to gather. Behind her, Kensington opened the black envelope. Inside was a single printed page, a copy of the ACARS message that Marcus Webb had sent to Captain Fogarty mid-flight. The executive directive ordering the crew to offer Naomi compensation, not to address the civil rights breach, not to move her, not to remove Trevor Mills from the seat that was legally hers, simply to manage her, to offer her champagne and warm towels and sufficient gesture to prevent her from escalating further. Zenith's own communications in their own system proved that the company had known about the violation in real time and had responded by trying to buy her silence rather than correct the wrong. They had documented their own decision. Kensington handed the page to his colleague without speaking. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then one of them said quietly, "We need to call Chicago." The Windsor Suite at Heathrow Terminal 3 was a set of quiet, immaculate rooms behind the main arrivals hall, a space most travelers never knew existed, designed for arrivals that required a degree of discretion the main terminal floor could not provide. Naomi sat at the desk in the suite's small working room. Rain moved against the window. Somewhere on the tarmac below, a Zenith cargo plane was taxiing slowly, its blue tail logo blurring in the wet gray morning. She opened her laptop. She sent 3 messages. The first was to Jonathan Reeves. "File the DOT complaint now. The package includes the time-stamped incident record, the carriage contract violation, documentation, the verbatim text of Voss's police threat, and the ACARS message, in which Zenith's executive team directed flight crew to offer me compensation rather than address the civil rights breach directly." That last item establishes that the company had real-time knowledge of the violation and chose management over correction. File it complete and unredacted. I want the Office of Aviation Consumer Protection to have everything. Jonathan's response came before she had fully closed the email. "Filing in 15 minutes. This is the most airtight case I've put my name on in 4 years. I'll call you when it's confirmed." "Are you all right?" she typed back. "Yes. I'm working." The second message went to the European operations contact at Aero Global, a name Sophia had located and introduced through a mutual industry connection the previous evening with a warm context note that had smoothed the introduction considerably. "Thank you for making time on short notice," Naomi wrote. "I'd like to discuss a significant infrastructure partnership opportunity that has come available following a change in my organization's carrier relationships. I'm in London through the end of the week and available at your convenience. I believe the structural fit between our organizations is considerable, and I'd welcome the chance to walk through the framework I have in mind." The third message was to Gregory Dalton. She had already sent the message that mattered. This one was shorter, and she chose its register carefully. Not cold, not warm, simply direct. Gregory. "The DOT complaint has been filed, including the ACARS message. I'm telling you this directly, rather than allowing you to find out through counsel, because I think you deserve to understand the full picture of what happened on your watch today. This was not a rogue employee making a bad decision in isolation. This was a practiced behavior operating inside a culture that permitted it. What you do with that understanding is the most important question in front of your organization right now. The contract is gone, but the question remains." "Naomi." She closed the laptop. She sat back in the chair and let herself be still for a moment, not processing, not planning, simply present in the quiet of the room with the rain on the window and the sound of a city going about its morning outside. She thought about Diane Hartwell at the podium. The French twist. The manicured hands. the gold earrings catching the fluorescent light of Terminal 4 as she stepped sideways to block the lane. The practiced fluency of the lies weight distribution equipment change anomaly with your reservation, the ease of each one, the total absence of hesitation. That ease was the thing Naomi had been thinking about for 7 hours, not the anger of it which she had metabolized quickly. The ease, the reflexive confidence of a person who had done this before in some form many times and had never once been corrected for it. That was what a failed culture produced. Not monsters, just people whose worst reflexes had been allowed through sustained institutional silence to become habits. Jonathan confirmed the filing 35 minutes later. DOT has opened a preliminary inquiry. Zenith's legal team has been formally notified. The ACARS message is the centerpiece their own communications prove they knew. This will not be a quick process, but it will be a thorough one. Good, Naomi replied. Sophia sent a separate update 20 minutes after that. Kavanaugh and Reed have formally terminated Trevor Mills. They've released a brief public statement citing conduct inconsistent with firm standards. Their operations team has also contacted our office requesting an emergency conversation about restoring software access. Naomi considered this for a moment. Tell them Ashford Logistics Group processes restoration requests through standard channels with a current response time of 30 business days. She typed back, route the request through the formal portal. She put the phone face down. She thought about Trevor Mills, not with satisfaction and not with sympathy, but with the kind of measured, honest recognition that distinguishes between different degrees of culpability. He had not engineered what happened at that gate. He had arrived at a gate where it was already happening, accepted its outcome without a question, and walked down a jet bridge as if the space he was moving into had simply been waiting for him. That was not the same thing as what Diane and Conrad had done. It was also not nothing. There was a category of participation that lived between active harm and active resistance. The comfortable middle ground of people who benefit from a system without ever having to look directly at the mechanism that produces the benefit. Trevor Mills had spent 7 hours at 35,000 feet beginning to understand what that middle ground actually cost, and not just in terms of his own career. What it cost the person who was handed 33E while he settled into 1A. Whether that understanding would last was not something Naomi could determine or control. She hoped it would. She also knew that hope was the beginning of change, not the guarantee of it. She stood up from the desk. She straightened her blazer. She checked the time early enough to walk across the city before her afternoon was consumed by calls, and London in the rain was a particular kind of beautiful that she never passed up when she was here. She had a meeting with Aero Global confirmed for Friday morning. The preliminary framework document was already drafted. The structural fit, she believed, was genuinely considerable better in some respects than what the Zenith deal would have produced, because Aero Global's operational culture had a cleaner record, and because partnerships built on aligned values tended to outlast partnerships built on desperation. Zenith had come to her from desperation. They had needed her more than she had needed them, and they had still managed to treat her like she didn't belong in the lane. She picked up her briefcase. She nodded once to the concierge who opened the suite door. The London morning was cold and wet and indifferent in the best possible way. The city simply continuing as cities do, entirely unconcerned with the specific weight of what any single person was carrying through its streets. Naomi stepped into it. The consequences arrived in the order Naomi had anticipated, and they arrived fast. Diane Hartwell and Conrad Voss were formally terminated within 18 hours of Flight 808 touching down at Heathrow. Their names were added to the aviation industry's internal Do Not Hire registry, a mechanism that operates without public announcement and without meaningful appeal. Neither had union protections adequate to contest the specific documented actions against them. The security footage from Gate B22 captured the full sequence. The ACA-RS message established that Zenith's corporate leadership had known while it was happening. Jonathan Reeves described the evidentiary package in a call with Naomi 2 days later as the clearest-cut case of documented discriminatory enforcement he had assembled in 20 years of aviation law. Diane's legal representation attempted to frame the downgrade as a routine operational adjustment made under time pressure. The recording of Conrad Voss threatening Naomi with Port Authority police to guarantee her compliance made that framing impossible to maintain. Both of them were gone. At Zenith Airlines' Chicago headquarters, Gregory Dalton held emergency board sessions on consecutive days. The DOT preliminary inquiry had already crossed into public record, not buried in regulatory filings, but front-page coverage, the kind that required no amplification because every element of the story was doing its own work. A black female CEO with a confirmed first-class ticket. A fabricated weight distribution excuse deployed on a 777. A police threat to force compliance. A 7-hour transatlantic flight in a middle seat near the lavatories. An $850 million contract dissolved before the plane landed. And a laptop opened in seat 33E. That detail specifically seemed to be the one people couldn't let go of. The image of Naomi Ashford sitting in the seat she had been forcibly assigned, not crying, not filming, not performing her outrage for anyone, just working quietly and with devastating precision on the architecture of what came next. It traveled across platforms without being pushed. People shared it in the way they share things that confirm something they already knew but rarely see demonstrated so completely. Zenith's stock declined 21% across the first 2 trading sessions, following the story breaking publicly. Gregory Dalton tendered his resignation at the conclusion of the second emergency board meeting. Zenith's communications team released a statement describing it as a planned leadership transition. Financial analysts described it as something else entirely. Trevor Mills landed at Heathrow with a deactivated corporate card and no access to Kavanaugh and Reed's systems. He spent 3 days in a mid-range hotel in Paddington, which was not uncomfortable, but which was paid for on his personal card at a rate that shrank his available credit in a way that clarified certain things before booking a seat on a budget carrier back to Newark. He flew in economy. Middle seat. The man in the window seat had wide shoulders and reclined immediately after takeoff. Trevor kept his elbows tucked in for the full 8 hours and did not sleep. He wrote a letter during that flight. Handwritten on hotel stationery, he had folded carefully into his jacket pocket before checkout. It was addressed to Naomi Ashford at the Ashford Logistics Group office in New York. It contained no requests, no explanations, no justifications, only an acknowledgement. And a single sentence near the end that read, "I knew something was wrong at that gate. I just decided it wasn't mine to fix." Naomi received the letter 10 days after returning from London. She read it once, sitting at her desk with her morning coffee. She did not respond to it. She placed it in a folder she kept in the bottom drawer, a folder that held things she chose to keep, not because they were useful, but because they were honest, and honesty in that form was worth preserving. The DOT investigation of Terminal 4 expanded as Naomi had anticipated it would. Seating override records across 4 years revealed a pattern, a consistent documented correlation between passenger demographics and involuntary downgrade frequency that was not subtle and was not limited to Diane Hartwell's shifts. The investigation grew to encompass multiple agents and the terminal's management structure. 3 months later, under new interim leadership, Zenith Airlines announced a mandatory retraining program across all domestic terminals, an independent audit mechanism for seating override codes, and a passenger advocacy office with external oversight. Whether these changes would hold in practice rather than in press releases was a question that required time to answer honestly. Naomi noted them without comment. The partnership with Aero Global was announced 6 weeks after London. The deal established Ashford Logistics Group's proprietary routing software as the primary infrastructure backbone for Aero Global's transatlantic cargo operations. The contract value exceeded $920 million across a 5-year term with renewal options. Several financial publications noted that Aero Global was Zenith Airlines' largest and most direct European competitor. Naomi did not comment on the comparison. 6 weeks after she returned from London, Naomi flew to Charlotte, North Carolina. She booked a standard commercial flight through the normal portal and flew in economy without making anything of it. She took a car from the airport to the no-day neighborhood, which had changed considerably in 14 years. The old industrial buildings renovated into studios and restaurants, the streets louder and more luminous than she remembered. She found the building. The dry cleaning shop on the ground floor was now a specialty coffee roaster, the kind with exposed brick and small batch single origin beans on a handwritten chalkboard behind the counter. She looked up at the second floor window, the converted storage room. The place where the overheating laptop and the frozen peas and the October cold coming through the gap in the window frame had been the whole environment in which something enormous had quietly, stubbornly begun. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment. She thought about the version of herself who had stood in a similar spot 14 years ago, 27. The no from Meridian Capital still sitting in her chest like a weight she was deciding whether to carry or put down, and had chosen with no particular heroism, simply because she had nothing else she was willing to do to go back upstairs and keep working. She thought about seat 33E. She thought about what it meant that the same calculation, the same 3-second assumption had followed her from that sidewalk in Charlotte to a priority boarding lane at JFK, and what it meant that this time she had been in a position to make the consequences of that assumption, something the people responsible could not undo. She stood there for a minute, maybe 2. Then she turned, walked back to the car, and went home. I've been sitting with this story for a long time before deciding to tell it here, and I want to be honest with you about what stayed with me because it wasn't what I expected. It wasn't the stock price dropping. It wasn't the contract number, or the DOT investigation, or the fact that the man in seat 1A ended up flying home in economy on a budget carrier. All of that is satisfying in the way that justice, when it arrives cleanly, is satisfying. But it fades. Numbers fade. Headlines fade. What stayed with me was the walk. The walk from the priority lane to seat 33E. The walk through first class, past the man in the seat that was hers, past the warm towels and the champagne and the soft light all the way to the back of the plane, and then sitting down, tucking her elbows in, opening the laptop, not performing pain, not asking anyone to witness what had just happened to her, just working. I keep returning to what that requires, not professionally, but as a human being. To have someone look at you and complete their entire assessment of who you are in 3 seconds, to have that assessment be wrong in a way you know with absolute certainty, and to absorb it without letting it knock you off your foundation. To convert it into fuel rather than wound. To know yourself so completely that someone else's verdict about you doesn't become the story you tell yourself. That is not an accident. That is something built. Slowly, over years, through the discipline of choosing not to let other people's assumptions become your operating truth. Naomi Ashford didn't win because she was powerful. She was powerful because she had spent 14 years refusing to become what other people decided she was. There is a moment early in this story that I come back to more than any other, when she's standing at that gate phone extended, the boarding pass glowing on the screen with the gold rim and the global Zenith watermark. And Diane Hartwell's eyes flick to it, register it fully, and then look away. That is the decisive moment, not the police threat, not the seat being handed to Trevor Mills. That moment when a woman looked at clear evidence and chose her prejudice over what was in front of her because the prejudice felt more real to her than the fact. That happens everywhere, not just at airport gates. It happens in hiring decisions and funding meetings and boardrooms and classrooms and the small daily calibrations people perform when they decide in 3 seconds who gets the benefit of the doubt and who has to earn it from scratch. Most of the time, the person on the receiving end of that calibration never gets to show what the assumption cost. Most of the time, there is no $850 million contract waiting in the wings. No, Jonathan Reeves, with a legal filing ready. No ACARS message that documents the company's own knowledge of the wrong. Most of the time, it's quiet, personal, invisible to everyone except the person sitting in the seat they were handed instead of the one they earned. So this story isn't really about Zenith Airlines. And it isn't really about Naomi Ashford, though she is extraordinary, and I mean that without qualification. It's about the walk, the decision to keep going. The specific, unglamorous discipline of people who refuse to outsource their sense of their own worth to the people who are trying to diminish it. I believe everyone has some version of that in them. Not always expressed on a transatlantic flight with legal counsel on standby. Sometimes it's smaller, the decision to stay in the room when someone makes you feel like you don't belong. The decision to open the laptop anyway. The decision to know what you're worth precisely enough that when someone hands you a different number, you can look at it clearly and go back to work. That's the thing I want you to carry out of this one. If this story meant something to you today, tell me in the comments. Have you ever been handed a seat that wasn't yours and known absolutely that you belonged somewhere else? I want to read every single one. Subscribe if you haven't already. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And I'll see you in the next one.